start, I'd like to thank a few people. First of all, Mrs. Lambert for teaching me throughout the whole year how to write this paper. It's been a big help, and all the edits that she's done are invaluable. And I'd like to also thank my mentor, Mr. Eric Moss, for all the good questions he's asked, making me think about what I'm truly saying here. It's been very helpful, so yeah, thank you both. How many of you have seen someone die right in front of you? Watch someone breathe their last breath? What about seeing a corpse at a car wreck with weeping family members nearby? A few of us may have seen these heavy things, and they leave a lasting memory that is burned into your mind. But how many of us have seen someone die in a movie, a video game, in the media as a whole? Most, if not all of us, have seen death like this before, yet we barely notice. Both scenarios involve human death, literal and digital, so what's the difference? What does it do to us? Today I will answer all of these questions. Violence. It's a concept that has been around since the earliest times of the Bible, starting most notably with the infamous story of Cain and Abel. But media, particularly film and video games, have only been around for a little over 100 years. So when did violence enter into this specific world of media? Looking back to our earliest examples, we truly began to see films that build themselves up around violence show up around the 1930s in gangster movies, with people already being shot on screen. From here, films would continue to grow excessively violent, with more bloodshed on screen and more brutal deaths and torture being displayed. They would continue to show up in greater mass, leading to the films that we watch today. Video games have also followed a similar route and have ended up in the same boat as film has. While the style of these movies and games has shifted over the decades, the violent theme has stayed the same. To start, we need to highlight some definitions for terms that will be commonly used throughout this paper. Violence is one word that will be mentioned frequently. Merriam-Webster defines violence as, quote, the use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy, end quote. Media will be defined as, quote, a medium of cultivation, conveyance, or expression, end quote. This definition comes also from the Merriam-Webster. But why does this idea of violent media even matter? Isn't media supposed to be a light part of life that we can enjoy? While it may seem like this on the surface, the problem can and does go much deeper. At this point, many of you are bracing for me to tell you all that violent media is all horrible and that we should never consume it. We will instead be shifting our focus to what it actually does to us and asking the question concerning how we should approach it. Firstly, violent media leads to irrational and harmful shifts in our minds. Secondly, violent media parallels actual violence. And finally, violent media causes the devaluing of human life, even if subconsciously. Violent media leads to irrational and harmful shifts in our minds. The first topic that we will talk about concerns the truth that what we put into our hearts and minds is what will inevitably pour out. Now, whether you've heard about this from your parents, your church, or some other place, we've all crossed paths with this concept. This is greatly supported by the Word of God and is an undeniable truth that we see play out throughout our lives. Proverbs 4:23 states, quote, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it, end quote. Your heart leads to what flows out from you, so consequently, what goes into the heart is important. Luke 6:45 also asserts that, quote, the good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks, end quote. Again, we see this principle that what we put into our hearts is what will come out. To find proof of this, we need to look no further than myself. When I'm continually filling up my heart with things of the world and am ignoring the things of God, my life as a whole degrades. I snap at my family in anger. I'm depressed, and I have no motivation to pursue what God has in store for my life. I'm sure this is similar, if not the same, for you as well. So what happens to our hearts if we overconsume violent media? What could it lead to? There is physical evidence that violence affects our minds and actions. The first piece of evidence falls under the fact that violent media parallels actual violence. We see this play out in multiple modern examples. A study that was conducted by the Annenberg Public Policy Center revealed that the top 30 movies from 2000 to 2021 had a 200% increase in gun violence shown on screen. This jump in violence paralleled the growth of homicides and suicides in young U.S. citizens that involved firearms. These deaths now surpass that of motor vehicle crashes, cancer, drug overdoses, and poisoning. While other factors might have impacted this increase of death, one thing is clear. As we've been fed more and more violence in our media, more and more people choose violence in their actual lives. One story that I would like to highlight in particular concerns an 18-year-old German man named David Somboli. CNBC reports that on Friday, July 22nd, 2016, David invited locals in his area to a McDonald's for some free food using a fake Facebook account. Once people arrived, David took out his Glock 17 and began to fire on the unsuspecting crowd. Many were killed and many more injured. This horrific event was planned for over a year and many suffered because of it. As authorities looked into the case, they found that David had played a violent game called Counter-Strike Source. Robert Heimberger, president of the state crime office, stated that this game was played by nearly every known rampage killer, which is better described as someone who kills multiple people in quick succession. While David did have other problems, he and nearly every other rampage killer had played this form of violent media, and this is a fact that cannot be overlooked. And it isn't just actual violence that grows in our lives. We also see a decrease in our executive function, which is high-order cognitive abilities such as working memory, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, planning, reasoning, and problem-solving. A study by Roya Gondoli was conducted on 30 boys and 30 girls and revealed that those who consumed violent media had in turn a decreased executive function. These people were more on edge and lashed out quicker than others. Aggression in people also increases as well. Another study led by Yusuf Hassan involved two groups of subjects being given either violent or non-violent games to play in 20-minute sections over 3 days. After each session, subjects were told they were competing against an opposite-sex opponent in a reaction-based game, while in reality, they were going against someone who controlled who won the game. The loser of each round was punished by having an unsettling noise playing in their ear, with its volume being determined by the winner. Results showed that those who played the violent games had a higher hostile expectation and increased aggression. We see that as we consume violent media as a whole, actual violence goes hand in hand with it, along with how we actually function as people. Now that we've established that violent media affects our physical mind and emotions, we will shift our focus to the actual value of human life and how it has been negatively affected by this type of media. Firstly, there is a God-given value that has been placed on each and every one of us. This has been around us since we were created. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28 states, quote, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them." End quote. Out of every creature that was formed during creation, God chose to make humans after the very image of the Most High. He also gives dominion over the rest of the earth to these people, giving them a special authority. If he puts this much attention into you and I, then we ought to realize that there's a unique value that is placed on all of our lives. But how did we as a society get from violent media to the actual devaluing of human life? There's a bridge between the two that needs to be addressed, and that comes in the form of violent video games. Video games, particularly violent ones, praise the goal of killing people, leading to the devaluation of human life. Take Call of Duty for an example, a game that most of us have heard about. It's a first-person shooter, which is a shooter-based game where the player sees through the eyes of the character. And the goal of this game is to be the last man standing in a battle royale. How to win is obvious. You must simply eliminate your opponents. On top of winning the round, you get cash and better equipment for each person you eliminate. Rewards are being given for your actions of killing one another. This game, among many others, has the same goal and culture of rewarded violence, leading to the undermining of human life. We've already looked at how violent video games praise and encourage the goal of killing people, but now I want to turn our attention to the idea of how this actually causes us as individuals to devalue human life, even if subconsciously. A real-world example lies in a study done by the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. 257 college students were given a randomly assigned video game. One group got a violent game, while another group received a non-violent game. And everyone was asked if they had regularly played a violent video game, regardless of what type of game they had received for the study. They then measured the heartbeats of each participant. The group that played non-violent games regularly came out to about 65.5 BPM, while the violent gamers settled at 66.4 BPM. Each group then played their assigned game for 20 minutes, and heartbeats were measured yet again. Non-violent gamers came out to about 68.4 BPM, and violent gamers capped at 69.3 BPM. Finally, they watched a film with intense violence in it, including police encounters, shootings, and prison fights. Again, they measured heartbeats. The non-violent group shot up to about 70 BPM, while the violent group mellowed out to about 68.3 BPM. We see that people who play violent video games have a higher heartbeat while gaming, and a lower heartbeat when witnessing actual violence. In other words, they're more stressed when playing their game, but when it comes to real-world scenarios where people die, they are suddenly more relaxed. While most of us are not wanting people to die, we subconsciously care less about these actual people, and our body chemistry is proof. So what should we as Christians think? How much violence is too much violence? Or is there even such a thing as too much violence? Now, some might argue that we should restrict any and all forms of violent media in order to guard our hearts against its negative effects. While it is wise to be careful of what we let into ourselves, we must also realize that violence is a real part of our world and it has its specific place. In many Bible stories, we see God's people carry out extremely violent acts in the name of the Lord. Take David and Goliath for an example. Goliath had struck fear into the armies of Israel, and when David had come to his brothers to bring them food, we see David filled with the zeal of the Lord, and he challenges the giant. Goliath sees no threat in the boy and begins to taunt him, saying how he will feed his carcass to the birds. David replies, saying, quote, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and I'll cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." End quote. David then slew Goliath, cut off his head, and proceeded to massacre the entire Philistine army. There's a common theme we see throughout this story. We see violence being used for good to fight evil, and this is one of the times when it can be acceptable. The Bible is not afraid of this, and it in fact uses it to bring glory to God in many cases. But what about violence in modern film? Can it be a good thing? I would argue that it does have a place in media as long as that violence is fighting for good. Take the movie series The Avengers, for instance. We see a group of heroes band together to stop multiple world-threatening events using violent methods and defeat the villain they are challenged by. In other words, we see a case of good versus evil, where good again uses violence to stomp out the evil. However, violence can also be used for evil in media as long as it's not glorified. If the media isn't praising the actions of the offender, it is acceptable to show and see to a degree. We live in a fallen world, and violence carried out by evildoers is unavoidable, but it is not something to be glorified in the media we consume. Others could argue that because we are in a fallen world, that we should be exposed to violence often since it is a part of our lives. While it is true that we need to be aware of the reality that we live in, we must also be careful of the effects that can be caused by overexposure. The effects of violent media are clear, as we've seen in my confirmatia. You as a person become more angry and rash, and you are subconsciously desensitized to real-world violence. It can become a slippery slope that gets out of control quicker than we would like to think. Romans 12:2 tells us to, quote, "Not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind," end quote. We as believers must be careful to not be influenced by the world, but to instead be the ones influencing the world. We must be careful to guard our minds and hearts against the amount of violent media we consume. We're going to leave that there. Throughout this thesis, we've looked at how violent media leads to harmful shifts in our minds. This led us to the question of the value of human life and the desensitization society has been afflicted with. Finally, we considered what to do regarding our approach to violent media. In a world that has many fallen aspects, why would something small like this matter to you and I? Surely there are things that we should be more concerned about. While there are problems that may seem big in the moment, we must also be vigilant as to not let things that may seem smaller take root in us. If we ignore what violence does to us now, it can and will lead to worse things. If us believers lose our vigilance in guarding our minds and hearts, we will only be painting a poor picture to unbelievers who look at how we act in our day-to-day lives. So what are some practical steps that we can take to avoid becoming desensitized to violent media and protecting our minds? Firstly, we as Christians must be reminding ourselves what God thinks about our lives. If God's thoughts are in the forefront of our minds, our hearts will remain tender. Secondly, ask yourself the question, is this violence being portrayed in the right way? Is the violence you are seeing being used to combat evil? Is it recognized as a somber thing? Or is it mindless slaughter that serves no purpose? As our world spirals further and further down the slippery slope of violent media, we must stay vigilant so as to not lose sight of the value of human life. Know what you are putting into yourself, and do not allow your flesh to be led by the world. Instead, be aware of the weight of violent media, keeping your eyes and heart centered on the will of God. Thank you.
In your thesis, there's a lot of correlation, but in regards to when you said that violent media and real violence go hand in hand, how does the correlation prove that the violent media is the cause? Because I would assume that as violent media has become more popular, fatherless homes have become far greater in number, and the reporting also on these violent incidents has also become more common. So how does the correlation necessarily imply causation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I didn't do like a ton of other research trying to find every single cause that led to it. This was just from the research I did. But I would say that I would say it's at least one of the contributing factors. I don't doubt that there are other things that could be affecting us as well. There's a lot of stuff that has happened from 2001 to 2021, but we have seen it grow along with it, and I don't think that's something that can just necessarily be ignored completely. So.
Yes. Sorry, I don't know your name.
What should we do against violent media?
Yeah, so this is something that I wasn't able to include because I have a limited time. But I would say it depends on it falls into really the parents of the household of what you are regulating for your children to watch. The rest of the world is only going to keep going down. It gets to that point of when you get that one hit that like makes you feel really good, you're only going to want something better, something that's more extreme. And so the world is going to keep going one way. The best we can do is get it out to our kids in moderation. I think it's something that we definitely need to be aware of, and that honestly can be good for us in certain cases, but we definitely cannot just let ourselves be completely unchecked, because it will get out of control really, really quick.
Yes. Yes, Jackson.
Do we recently play any video games that include any violence whatsoever?
That's a good question. No. I would say, also again, I wasn't really able to include this, but there are certain games that, I'm trying to think of a good example. I should know this, I've played video games. I would say like it's a game with like a good story narrative of like even like taking, I don't know, down a villain or something, like taking down like some arch lord. I don't know, but like I'm mostly targeting the games like Call of Duty, where it's just every 5 seconds you're executing someone to get better equipment to keep going. Like I think there should be at least more purpose to that before we just jump into it. So.
Would you say that minors who are involved in violent media, they start to struggle with anxiety and fear, which leads to maybe suicide or death of?
I didn't hear the first part of your question. I heard the second part.
Sorry, minors who are involved in violent media.
Yeah, so like, you're asking if violence, or minors who are involved in violent media, if that leads to like anxiety and so on and so forth. I necessarily didn't do a ton of research on that specifically, but from what I have looked at and what I can give you an good educated guess, I would say that I wouldn't be surprised if that is kind of the rabbit trail that leads to that. If someone is just isolated all the time, and all that they have is their Xbox or their PS5, and all that they do is get fed these games that really have no purpose behind them, that are just complete bloodshed and gore for hours a day, that is definitely going to, I wouldn't be surprised if that leads to depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. So.
Sean.
Why did you pick this topic? Like, did you just not like video games?
No, I actually, I love video games, but it got to a point where it was more of a heart check for me with the amount of violent movies that I watched and the types of games I was playing. I really just thought about, I was like, man, is this really that good for me? Like, is this much, like, good? And so I decided to write about this also to kind of correct myself as well, so.
Bailey.
Okay, so I'm going to try to articulate this well, but where would you draw the line between good violence and bad violence?
Yeah.
You know, like stories in the Bible, there's a whole bunch of crazy stories that are being told, especially in the Old Testament, about a lot of violence, and then there's video games where people are just competing. Where would you draw the line?
I would say in with like the Bible, that violence has a goal. It's for God's glory in a lot of those cases. All the battles that are fought, and the Lord comes and delivers them, like they slaughter the whole enemy army. Like that's for the Lord's glory. When it comes to like, I would say like violent like horror films that are just slashers, or like the kind of games I was describing, like Call of Duty, that kind of thing, Grand Theft Auto, all that. I would say that pertains more to almost a bloodlust that you're trying to satiate. That's for your own entertainment of saying, no, I like that. That's you just trying to fill up a sinful desire. So.
Yes, here at the back.
Do you think it's okay to watch like historical movies, like World War I movies, that kind of thing, with wars and shooting in that?
Definitely, yes. So this is also something I wasn't able to include, but I would say, especially as you get to an older age, like getting into your teenager years and like later teens, I think it's actually a good thing to be aware of what the reality of our world is. Like one of the movies that I watched that really like opened my eyes, that like was really good for me, I think, was Saving Private Ryan. Like just seeing like what these people actually went through, the amount of suffering that they had to go through. Like that is something that is really sad and heavy, but it's something that we need to be aware of. And now obviously it's not something like every night you just like, oh well, time to watch Saving Private Ryan 2. Like it's not something you just go on and like watch every single night, but every now and then it's good to have movies like that. So like Saving Private Ryan, Passion of the Christ, all that. I say, and once you get to a certain older age, I think that's good to be able to have like that reminder. So.
Do you think it's ever beneficial for someone to be desensitized to violence? Let's say you take a father, for example, and sometimes I think it's important for a father to remain calm and be not emotionless, but be able to control their emotions in times of violence. So do you think that's justified to be desensitized to that?
Yeah. I would say yes. I would say when it comes to when I think of like a soldier, for example. Like let's say a soldier fighting in Afghanistan. I would say the mindset you have to have there is recognize like the weight of taking a life, like it's a heavy thing, but like also don't be so like unsensitized to it that you're gonna be broken apart, like you're just gonna crumble as soon as you kill someone. Like you have to be ready for that, and so I think especially with guys, I think it is good for us to have a certain level of desensitization, because then if it comes to the point, let's say, of defending your family, like you're not gonna have to be able to hesitate. Like you're gonna be able to just handle that much better than your average person. So.
Mr. Moss.
So I was kind of jumping off of Jared's question, but I would describe myself as someone that's pretty desensitized to violence. I played a lot of violent video games and seen a lot of violent movies and butchered a lot of large animals. So what ways would you recommend that I resensitize myself to violence, especially when it comes to this sacred nature of human life and the destruction of the image of God?
Yeah, it's really good. I would say to really consult the Bible, really immerse yourself in what God thinks about human life, what God thinks about us. And there's so many verses of talking about the ways the Lord cares for us and loves us. And I think if you take that and you put that on the forefront of your mind, that's gonna naturally reset like yourself. I think if you're really desensitized, something like Saving Private Ryan, I don't think is really gonna have as much effect on you of like being able to recognize a somber feeling that you need to have. So I would say in your case, I would say read the Bible, read what God thinks about us, because that is what holds priority.
Pastor Sweet.
What role because you're talking about media broadly, what role do you think television should have in showing violent sports, such as football that leads to all sorts of repercussions, mixed martial arts, auto racing, where many people watch these things explicitly for the violent elements of them?
It's a very good question. I didn't do much research on that. I didn't have that in my thesis, obviously. So I don't know much about it, but from what I can say, you're asking about like sports, watching it for the violence. I think that comes to like a certain degree. Like football, it can lead to injuries, but a lot of the plays, it's like people getting tackled and stuff. That's that's different than like a horror slasher movie where like someone's thrown to a wood chipper or something like that. It's two completely different forms of violence. So I think when it comes to something like wrestling or football, I think that honestly can be a good thing for like guys to play in and like be able to compete in things like that. So.
Right. Yes.
If we have a smaller cousin who plays violent video games on like a daily basis, and how well, they're showing like violent characteristics, how do we calmly talk to them about that without coming off as rude?
If it's your younger cousin, I would honestly say probably talk to someone that'd probably be more rational as their parents. Talk to them about what you're seeing in your cousin and like tell them that you're worried. Because I think if you bring that up to them, they're gonna do a hard check on themselves and be like actually reevaluate what they're letting their child consume. So.
All right, well, our time is up. I want to congratulate you, Elisha, on successfully completing your senior thesis.